Horses are among the most recognizable of animals and are, alongside the dog, mankind's most important domesticated animal. It is difficult to overstate the impact horses have had on humanity, from their featuring in some of our earliest artwork, frequency as favored game, their early domestication in western central Eurasia around 6,000 years ago, to a critical role in countless wars, agricultural and travel utilities, along with technological innovations throughout history, all the way to modern times where they are still beloved and championed as pets and work companions. In Kaimere, horses have had at least 3 independent domestication events in the known world alone. Most famous are the Shu, who domesticated a species of stenonine equus introduced in the pre-Hausie Prairie 1.5 million years ago, the Airos. Domesticated Airos are called Aranos. Aranos horses are large, having strong enough backs to carry a rider thanks to similar mutations found in modern earth horses, are of responsive temperament, and excel in both speed and endurance. Aranos horses have integrated with their wild kin, the Airos, such that most wild horses have some feral ancestry. The other 2 domestication events, the Kadanath Ram and Southern Arveleth Sinmar horses, are both caballine horses usually classified as Equus ferus, though belong to distinct subspecies and some researchers consider them each their own species. The ram horses of Kadan, or perhaps more appropriately ram ponies, were fairly small and their backs could not support a rider. However, their ankles have supportive struts and hooves a fast-growing rubbery sole to give them more traction and support when traversing uneven terrain. Wild ram are quite rare, with most Kadanath wild horses actually being feral domesticates. When they were bred with much larger domesticated Sinmar of Arvel, they were large enough to ride, though these horses now required tremendous amounts of food, given greater size and higher energy demands, as they were far more stubborn and aggressive. Domesticated horses were introduced from Bronze Age Eurasia during the Mercantile Age, 3,000 years ago, added to this stock, and these, mixed with ram and Sinmar horses, became the standard domesticated horses that the Osatran Empire established throughout the known world, the Garam. Garam are very sure-footed horses thanks to an ancestry in uneven terrain, and are quite capable of carrying a rider. Thanks to Sinmar ancestry, they are very spirited and powerful horses, but aren't nearly as aggressive. Mighty work and war horses of more Sinmar stock and breeds for travel over rough terrain with more ram, while horses with more Bronze Age Earth ancestry often have more amiable temperaments, though even the most tame Garam horse is considered fairly ornery. Osatran horses became quite versatile very quickly, though after the collapse of the Empire, the horses they introduced throughout the known world all took on more independent breeds, with many becoming mutts or outright feral populations. The Crescent, in particular, had a very successful feral population of mountaineering Garam horses that Telmeid nomads happily captured and tamed when the need arose, but natural selection in this environment keeps them healthy and virile. There were many instances of domestication from these populations, which many breeds arose from, but the rise and fall of so many dynasties throughout the Crescent means few breeds have long pedigrees. It must be noted that according to many Telmeid scholars and indeed records of the Great Library itself, that the horses of their mountains are of native stock, with some arguing Osatran Garam were mixed into this lineage, and others even stating it's merely a case of convergence. It's possible that a caballine horse of some currently unknown stock was harvested to the area, with the most likely point of origin being a caballine introduced from western North Africa, but this has not been verified by any material evidence of horses prior to the Osatran Empire. Highland fossil records are notoriously poor, so this possibility cannot be ruled out, but it must be said that these horses show clear signs of all 3 in the Garam heritage, and nothing particularly striking to set them apart that cannot be explained by a few thousand years adapting to this new habitat. When the Shu migrated south and conquered the crescent around 500 years ago, their own domesticated Aranos horses were introduced to the Garam horses that had now been in the crescent for over 2 millennia. Despite being distinct species and indeed different equus subgenera, the Shu bred these two horses to suit their needs. Males are always sterile, and most females are, but they primarily used Aranos, stallions, and Garam mares to breed these mules anyway, instead of trying to select for an independent population. It took a few years to establish robust numbers, but the Canos mule was made. With long, strong legs yet sure hooves, and a thicker coat that could navigate the mountain terrains with the best of the feral Garam horses, but having a level temper and endurance of the Aranos. In the conquest of the mountains, these Canos mules were instrumental in imperial troop movement. In modern times, the Canos mule is but one of many instances of integration between these two equus populations. There are a few fertile mares of these hybrids, and while there have been some efforts to establish stable populations, often pure hybrid lines eventually run sterile, and whenever one mixes in becomes dominant to the point that they become indistinguishable from that lineage, so, for the most part, new hybrids are generally preferred. Elites of the Telmeid and Shu often prefer their own respective stock, but for the average citizen of the Empire, they are quite happy with the versatility that mixing ancestry affords. Each species brings useful things to the table in these mules, and imperial horses have a wider spectrum of warm to cold-blooded temperaments and a greater range of acceptable climates in which they can thrive compared to modern horses because of some of this partial integration. Though there are a great many animals that the peoples of Kaimere employ as mounts, that a majority of Chimeans ride horses is a testament to their practicality. They are, in almost every measurable way, the best animal to ride. Trocotul Letopterns are more powerful, have greater agility and dietary flexibility, but are wide and somewhat uncomfortable to ride for great distances. Kadrith bulls are more formidable in battle, but have inferior endurance and are even less comfortable to ride than a Trocotul. Gatul camels are almost as fierce and command superior endurance to all but the most purebred imperial Aranos, though they are not as fast or agile as a horse, which can limit their utility in battle or labor. Urek of Picardia can cover more ground in a day than a horse and are much less even terrain, and are also easy to feed on whatever is along the road, but they require more care and can be very picky about who they allow to ride them. Hul riders are quite nimble and can eat almost any vegetation, but these Elasmarians are only large enough to carry children. Horses are easier to maintain than these other mounts, as a single hoof can be cleaned and shoed while the animal stands, instead of having to be lifted as must be done with bulls or the dinosaurs, Trocotul, and camels that cannot be shoed at all due to their soft feet, and this is a tremendous advantage. Yes, they may have more limited diet than some, but most places in the known world have grass off-road or feed available and accessible as options in many stores near roads. Horses may not be the fastest, strongest, best over distance, or at traversing uneven ground, but they are the easiest and most reliable. For a vast majority of Chimeans, this makes them the obvious choice for a mount. Domesticated horses are the most familiar of horses to the peoples of Kaimere, but they are far from the only equids in the known world, much less beyond. Southern Arvel is home to two species of horse. Wild Sinmar horses are a common sight on the southern steppes. These cabaloid horses live in large herds of related mares and their foals, led by an elder female and defended by a single stallion, who will sometimes tolerate a small bachelor herd of males living near his harem. This bachelor herd is usually comprised of 2 to 5 males, and are often but not always related to the lead stallion. His tolerance of these other males is believed to derive from the many predators that these horses face. Though the lead stallion is the primary father of the foals in the herd, often the bachelors will be permitted occasional mating, which is thought to encourage them to aid him in not only defending the whole herd from threats, but also from challenges by other dominant stallions seeking to supplant him. Herds often number between 20 and 50 adult mares, though they do sometimes intermingle with other herds, occasionally congregating as several hundred animals and grazing in fission-fusion units. This affords excellent protection and is common in the dry winters when predator pressure increases, though it is quite stressful on the stallions as they must work overtime to keep track of their mares. Sinmar horses are very powerful animals, and though they have great speed, they fall short on endurance compared to earth horses. Compared to many other horses, they are more of a mixed feeder, with grazing being a majority of their diet, but as much as 40% of their seasonal consumption is leaves and pine needles. It has been proposed that the Sinmar have ancestry from numerous caballine equus species introduced to this habitat from Europe around 600,000 years ago. Though the Sinmar is usually classified as Equus ferus Sinmar, some argue that Mosbacensis, Susenborensis, and perhaps even earlier Asian caballine horses that are not yet preserved in the fossil record but could have been around, are just as viable given most, if not all, contributed to the modern population. This Sinmar can so readily reproduce with horses from Earth does lend credence to at least their main ancestry being Equus ferus or Mosbacensis, but this remains uncertain. To skirt the mess, Equus Sinmar is increasingly favored, at least until such time as a comprehensive genetic study is established that a majority ancestor might be identified. Perhaps because of this highly diverse ancestry, or maybe as a consequence of integration with feral domesticates, the Sinmar comes in a very wide range of colors. A gray coat is most common, comprising around half the population, with the rest coming in brown, white, black, and gold. Spotting is quite common. Manes are usually short and erect, though thanks to integration with feral Sinmar, some have longer manes that droop like domesticated horses. The other horses found in the southern steppes is the much less abundant Sinjara, or Arveloth wild ass. Despite the name, this is a stenonine horse, like the Nikari Iros. Likely from a lineage closer to asses and zebras than true horses, but branched off before the other two split, so is neither zebra nor ass. These are strict grazers. Sinjara are highly aggressive animals. Like the Sinmar, they live in herds, though these herds are a lot smaller, rarely more than 10 mares, and usually closer to 5, with only a single stallion guarding the herd. According to the Arveloth peoples in the area, domesticating the Sinjara is out of the question, as they are not only too aggressive to be penned together, they will attack other livestock and their keepers. Also, they are too small to confidently ride, and are less flexible in their diet compared to the Sinmar, further reducing their utility. As there's really no reason to keep them that isn't better suited by the already domesticated Sinmar, Sinjara are only regarded by the Arveloth peoples as a source of food. As a game animal, they are quite well regarded, with hunts of these aggressive and formidable wild asses being a favored pastime among the nobility. Further west, beyond the known world on Arvel's dry coast, another horse can be found. This is Abernathi's stallion, a Hipparion horse of humble dimensions. They are experts at extracting nutrients from harsh vegetation, packing in whatever dry grass, sedges peeking from crevices, and salty mangrove leaves they can find. The forests they call home enjoy a lush yet brief wet season, but for the most part, these coastal woodlands and prairies have little to offer. Abernathi's stallion are one of the more common herbivores in this habitat. Many horses, throughout their prehistory, have had a depression on their snouts between nostril and eye. This preorbital fossa is common in many prehistoric horses, but absent in Equus and its closest relatives, along with some Hipparions. The purpose of this is unknown, though housing a gland has been suggested. In Abernathi's stallion, these glands not only are important in territory marking, as males aggressively snort on trees and mares, it is also where this little horse stores and expels the excess salt that they intake when consuming mangrove leaves. They aren't mangrove leaf specialists like the Hugeldun or helmeted runendrake, which take in a much greater salt quantity, but Abernathi stallions still greatly benefit from having an ability to filter salt in these glands for their expulsion. Turning to the east, into the central forests of Arvel, we find a very peculiar horse. Indeed, it took some time for them to even be recognized as such. They are entirely absent from the fossil record and only found in the Arvelith jungles, so their precise evolutionary prehistory is unknown. Though nocturnal and elusive, leading to minimal sightings and encounters, they seem to be quite successful in their range, perhaps extending far beyond what has been reliably confirmed. Most Hipparions, introduced to Kaimere 14 million years ago, stuck to the precious few open territories that were available to them. The Arum is a tapir-like Hipparion that is thought to have instead adapted to closed forests. There are other woodland Hipparions that persisted until the Great Drying, but none have a sturdy frame like this animal, instead having a more deer-like proportion. The Arum abandoned the long legs of its ancestors for a stockier build. Their legs retain the springfoot condition, so they are surprisingly light on their feet for such a ponderous-looking animal. They have been proposed to instead derive from Sinohippus, taken a little bit later, which resided in the region for several million years and looked a lot more like the Arum than their ancestors did, but a more derived ankles of the Arum tipped assembly naturalists off to its true ancestry as having once been a more open terrain animal that instead returned to its closed forest roots. Though solitary, Arum are quite territorial. Their glands are not used for expelling salt like Abernathi's stallion, just emitting fragrance. Both sexes mark their territory with loud snorts. The glands also produce an unpleasant odor that mammal predators in particular find decidedly unappealing. Not just in marking trees, but also direct sprays, which can linger for days no matter how much an animal tries to clean it off. Normally, big cats attack from the rear, where they face powerful backward kicks and very thick, loose hide that is difficult to maintain purchase on. Most Arum have scars from repelling big cat attacks on their rumps. It seems that they are very proficient at deterring these attacks, and even if the assault goes well and the lion or leopard manages to position for a throat or mouth bite, the pungent glands are expelled, and this seems enough to deter all but the most dedicated assailants. It has such a reputation among their predators that riders have reported Arvelith big cats in the north are deterred from the snorting of even conventional horses with no such glands. The sound itself is enough to give them pause. While there are 4 equids in Arvel, respectable numbers for a clade that was extinct in the known world as far as we know not too long ago, Nikar is a far more productive proving ground for this clade. The Housie Prairie alone is home to 7 wild horses and 1 feral domesticate. None of the prairie horses retained the ancestral gland. The Hipparion horses seem to have lost it, even though the related Arum of the Arvelith forests use it quite proficiently. They also snort aggressively, so the act remains, but no fragrance comes from this gesture. It is assumed that in equid lineages that took to open territory, the supply and maintenance of such a protein-rich gland was not worth the expense. Not only is grass not as nutritious as foliage that can be found in woodlands, nutrients the animal would need to maintain the demands of these glands, but especially from species using it to mark territories, there aren't trees or overhanging foliage to spray on that competitors or potential mates will likely encounter. Instead, vocalizations are a much more efficient form of communication, and the glands were independently lost both in the Hipparions and the equines. The Iros and its feral counterpart, the Aranos, are extremely common sights on the prairie. They are large, powerful stenonine horses with incredible speed and endurance. These are the fastest of the equids, capable of brief sprints approaching 60 miles per hour, though longer runs of 20 miles per hour are what they generally employ when evading predators. They are not as nimble as other equids, so can be more reliably captured if they are outrun, though even the Verasat hyena, which are the prairie's fastest predator, reaches around the same speed, so simply outrunning their predators is usually more than sufficient. Though most feral Aranos are some blend of white and black with a gold base, there has been some admixture with the occasional fertile Canos mule mares, such that a few other coat colors have been mixed into the population, and one can sometimes find little caballine traces as well. Their coats are not as variable as wild Sinmar, as fertile hybrids are quite rare and only in mares, and the prairie selects quite hard for gold colors, due to having so many predators equipped with strong color vision. There are also lots of feral Garam with their own traces of Canos mule that have become quite successful in the past few centuries, especially near settlements, and these have a similar selection pressure for gold coats. Wild Iros seem to have no tolerance for these housey Garam, but feral Aranos are much more accepting, especially those with some hybrids in their ancestry. All that to say, wild horses on the housey prairie are a very eclectic population that can be much more diverse than their generally uniform gold coat might suggest at first glance. The Iros is quite successful, but it is the only equine of the prairie. All 6 other housey equids belong to the Hipparion lineage. Perhaps the most peculiar horse on the housey prairie is the Myos. This is a Hipparion horse, but unlike the other 5 housey Hipparions, they did not return to the known world from Kyule. Instead, they were harvested alongside the Iros from Asia 1.5 million years ago. They were one of, if not Earth's last Hipparion horses on Earth at the time. However, once they came to Kaimere, they were suddenly in very good company, with Hipparions being the most diverse horse group in the known world, and certainly beyond. Myos phylogeny may be interesting, but of course, that which they are best known for is the trunk that they possess. Like the Saiga antelope of Earth, it is believed this trunk helps them filter dust from the air they breathe, a very useful adaptation on the dry, windy prairies to the north and west of the known world where they are most common. It also cools hot air during the heat of the day and warms it at night, which can be surprisingly frigid in the winter. This has allowed larger herds to thrive in conditions many other grazers avoid, such as the northern prairies that have plenty of grass but extreme heat and a lot of sand carried in the winds that makes it unappealing to many other grazers. Indeed, they are often the most common herbivore in the warmer subtropical zones, just north of the known world, often congregating in herds in their hundreds or even thousands. However, they are more susceptible to a number of respiratory infections most common in the wet season that are a lot less harmful to other ungulates. This slows them down and can make them vulnerable to predators that otherwise lack the speed or endurance to take them down. Sometimes these infections become so potent that they result in massive die-offs of entire herds. It is believed that the compaction of the skull to make room for the trunk, reducing space for the nasal turbinates, is the source of this vulnerability. Nasal turbinates are structures in the nasal cavity that help filter and warm incoming air. The trunk of Myos may be better at regulating inhaled temperature and filtering larger particulates such as dust and sand, but compacting the turbinates appears to have had a cost of their turbinate efficiency. There is another trunked animal on the prairies that is also especially common in the north, the Hegetothere antelope Chimi, also called the trunked jackalope. Chimeir are fast, shockingly agile, and notorious for their endurance. They are almost as fast as pronghorn and can run even longer. Despite having a trunk just like the Myos and living in the same northern prairies, Chimeir have similar rates of infection as other ungulates. Like the trunked oreodonts found in Kyule, the palate of these notoungulates features a posterior extension. Their nose opens further back in the skull. This increases the space that their nasal turbinates can filter bacterial particulates while also allowing the trunk to condition and prevent inhalation of sand and dust, giving these little ungulates the best of both worlds. Like other hegetotheres, Chimeir also have fairly large litters compared to most ungulates that only have one or two offspring. All things considered, it shouldn't be much of a surprise that Chimeir are by far the most abundant herbivore on the northern prairies. 5 other Hipparion horses can be found on the Hausi Prairie. All of these come from Kyule quite recently, crossing over to Nikar at a point of low sea levels almost 500,000 years ago. Some retain the ancestral three-toed conditions, though not all. The prairie ass, or Bruhos, is one of these exceptions. They have in many ways converged on equines, having only one toe, a complete loss of the snort glands, and smaller congestions of related mares with one stallion as a mate and guardian. Because of this, it was long assumed that they were an equine of some sort, and even classified in equus for a time, but finding more relatives in Kyule and northern Nikar coupled with finer detail studies illuminating their true heritage. The Bruhos is an extremely violent animal, with stallions in particular employing sharp hooves and long canines in attack against potential threats more readily than most other equids. Though the Shu have claimed to have bred their war horses with Bruhos, given their very distant phylogeny, these hybrids would almost certainly not be fertile and could perhaps not even be born to begin with. True or not, the myth persists, and Iros with longer fangs and greater aggression are certainly accounted for in the ranks of the horse lords. The remaining 4 horses of the prairie all belong to the same genus, Hippobates, the wandering horses. These retain 3 hooves, though only walk on the 3rd, as the 2nd and 4th digits are reduced to dew claws. They have the springfoot condition, and are thought to have driven the loss of these digits in other horses, so the retention of these toes in a lineage is a source of some confusion. They are not as fast or proficient with endurance as Iros, possibly a consequence of this digit retention. However, compared to the prairie ass and wild horses, these Hipparion horses have superior acceleration, reaching a top speed faster. Also, they are better able to make tight turns, stops, and other evasive maneuvers. It is believed that evolving alongside groups of theropods in Kyule that are often not as fast as comparable mammal predators in these environments, but often have superior reflexes and faster reactions, may have contributed to this adaptive drive. There are numerous mammal predators in the form of borophaging dogs, hyenas, and nimmervids in the environment, so they are not without mammal predators to worry about and must still be fast and invest in the endurance that so many theropods excel in, but investing more in maneuverability and acceleration appears to have been a very successful strategy for these horses back home in Kyule and as they arrived in the known world. Trocatule and other Chimean Leptopterns are known for their superior acceleration and agility compared to horses, and they remain better in both fields than Hipparion horses despite being larger, but the difference is not so dramatic that Hipparions are remarkably deft at evading predators even though they can't always directly outpace them. In a habitat with dromaeosaurs that are exceptional at starting and turning, this is evidently a worthwhile sacrifice in speed. This genus is also well known to be much less aggressive with one another. Males still violently defend their herd, but they are far more tolerant of other stallions. Often the dominant males of a herd are brothers or cousins, but they will sometimes even cooperate with others not related to them. Hippobates live in fission-fusion herds, with mare clans that keep in touch with broader herds, often from more distant relatives, though sometimes unrelated clans will cooperate for mutual protection. This genus is a housey specialist. When grazing, they fan out in their clans, as they generally eat the fresh tops of grass, so grazing in a denser congregation would only allow the vanguard to get good feed. The whole herd, therefore, doesn't eat in the same pasture, and really only congregate in full force during migrations. The speckled horse is the most abundant of all equid species in the known world. They represent the epitome of this genus, with the largest herds and the greatest agility. Mare clans numbering between 30 and 60 adults are common, but the broader herds often comprise several dozen of these to over 100 clans, and when all gather together can number in their thousands. Though most speckled horses feature the sunrise coat, there is another color morph called the midnight sky horse that are simply a melanistic variant. The Shu ascribe a wide range of omens and mysticism to these horses, especially of their virility and aggression, but it appears they are just a mutation that is often selected for. The most popular theory for this seeming clash in selection pressures between sunrise and midnight sky is that the midnight horses are better at deterring insects, while the sunrise coat is superior camouflage. There are far more sunrise horses, but it seems the benefits of fending off biting flies is advantageous enough that it is still found in between 5 and 30% of a given population. Chimean Zebras, or Shilhos, are a somewhat less abundant pair of cousins, though they still match the Iros in population estimates. They still live in fission-fusion herds, though often the clans are a lot smaller, usually 12 to 30 mares. Stallions are still tolerant of one another, though again tend to form smaller units with only 3 to 5 stallions guarding a clan instead of up to a dozen in speckled horses. Chimean Zebras come by a similar mutation of darker stripes derived from an expansion of their speckles. It is assumed that this is an adaptation for predator disorientation in the group, though similar to the proposed adaptive benefits of midnight sky horses, distracting the biting flies common on the housey prairie, especially near water, may be the actual adaptive drive. There are two species, one common in the more arid north and west, often called the lesser or desert Shilhos, while the prairie or common Shilhos is more abundant in the more humid, known world stretches of the housey prairie. They can be distinguished by both size and the fewer, bolder stripes on the desert Shilhos, though this often requires a trained eye to note in the field. Though originally considered the same species, further study has shown that they will not reproduce and seem to have actually diverged quite a long time ago, perhaps as long as 2 million years ago, back when they lived in Kyule. Largest is the housey giant horse, or Ukos. These bruisers stand over 2 meters at the shoulder and can weigh almost 2 tons in the largest stallions. Naturally, they are not as fast or as agile as their smaller cousins, but they make up for it in raw power. Stallions really only have to fear the Uktan. All other predators on the prairie wouldn't dare challenge the 2 to 5 stallions that together defend their clans. Ukos don't just eat housey crowns, they are much more comprehensive in their consumption, often taking their meals to the root. Sharp incisors and a crushing bite makes short work of this staggering quantity of poor nutrient grasses that they take in. Ukos are a favored prey of many adult Uktan. Though they are far from easy prey, with considerable speed and agility for their size, but the great endurance of the Uktan means they are still on the menu and well worth pursuit, unlike many smaller horses that would take much longer to tire. Though of more amiable temperament than others of their kind might make Hippobates seem like a good domesticate, they are often very aggressive with humans and take poorly to penning, becoming very stressed if they cannot move about. Furthermore, their backs are quite weak compared to the Iros, so they are unable to carry a rider in many smaller species. On the other hand, the Ukos can, and a few tamed individuals have been ridden by various Shu nobles who employ these formidable beasts for parades and even battle, though only the males seem amiable to confinement, so no captive animals have ever been bred despite extensive efforts. Also, their backs can handle a rider but aren't often strong enough for much armor, and the width of their torsos makes them uncomfortable for long journeys. Normally, lords will mount an Aranos for the journey, and only switch to their giant stallions for the engagement itself. That said, they are very loyal, responsive, and powerful mounts, and their ability to just consume massive quantities of the most abundant form of grass means that they are easy to feed, but not terribly practical in daily activities, especially since every individual is a tamed wild animal, not a proper domesticate. Though equids of the known world continents certainly have our modern equids beat in terms of diversity, since all of our equids are within the same genus and share a common ancestor around 4 to 5 million years ago and are generally similar, with all having one hoof, spring feet, and grass specializations. However, even the known world diversity pales in comparison to the wide range of horses found in Kyule. Hipparion horses are quite common on the Hausie Prairie. Hippobates has numerous species and its kin being among the most abundant grazers in their size class on the Hausie Prairie in Kyule. There are a few rhinos, pronghorns, slinghorns, and a wide range of pachycephalosaurs, thescelosaurs, and elasmarians, but for the most part, this northern prairie is horse country. The western grasslands of Kyule's southern hemisphere have a very different fauna, likely a consequence of mountains, deserts, and equatorial jungles forming a barrier that is difficult to traverse. So far, if there were any Hipparion horses, they are extinct, and gracile rhinos have long since taken their place. Larger than any of these gracile rhinos, and indeed the largest equoid in Chimeir, is the enormous horse Megapona ingens. These 3 to 5 ton animals live in small herds, generally 3 to 5 mares, their young, and a stallion. Their foreheads are thick, and in stallions, a trio of long ossicones offer points of impact that can be driven into other males and occasionally predators. Assembly agents noted with some amusement that in these southern prairies, horses and rhinos have flipped their familiar roles. Megafauna foals are vulnerable to the Fenriers themselves, along with ceratosaurs and dromaeosaurs, though adults only fear the Chacocabawe and Bokudu when these giant entelodonts occasionally are inclined toward predation. Even against these foes, the charge of a stallion comes with devastating impact. Megafauna look quite superficially similar to northern hemisphere rhinos of the anchored period, complete with 3 tall ossicones atop their head and being of similar size. There were other species in their clade that had a much wider range in this southern hemisphere, but it seems prior to the anchored period they were reduced to this last lineage. That they thrived prior to the anchored period, and the giant tricornus rhinos were major after, meant it was only recently identified that it was not a case of megafauna moving north, but that these 2 lineages are from entirely distinct branches of the perissodactyl tree. They're still quite successful, but only as the last holdout of a lost dynasty of giant horses that otherwise ended around 8 million years ago. Megafauna possess a powerful and pungent snort gland that they use to mark territories and spray predators, same as many other horses, though size and social living is of course their greatest defense. In the dense equatorial jungles between these habitats, horses have their greatest species and body plan diversity. Most abundant are the skunk hares. Their true species diversity is unknown, but they are at least a dozen reliably identified species and many more likely to be found in future expeditions of these lush equatorial jungles. These animals descend from tiny horses that came to Kaimere in the Oligocene. They have especially potent snort glands that they employ against predators and in the marking of their territories. As their name implies, the snort glands of skunk hares are extremely strong-smelling and quite adhesive. Not only does the smell ward off predators, it can get caught in fur and feathers with such challenge in removal that they are often left well enough alone unless the hunter is truly desperate. Bold patterns on their faces warn of this potency. The largest skunk deer is around the size of a whitetail, but most are quite small, between 3 and 8 kilograms, making them the smallest of Kaimere's horses. Crown horses, or Coronequidae, are another lineage of small forest equoid. They have ossicones on their head, most prominent in males, that they use to butt heads and shove one another. Crown horses also have prominent canines. If males cannot settle their scores with ossicones, they will bite their opponents, leaving nasty wounds. These fangs and ossicones can, of course, be used against predators. Though most are very small and the biggest get around the size of an elk, there are fossils suggesting they were once among the largest perissodactyls during Kyule's anchored period, with the very biggest approaching the size of the Canos. Megapona of the Fenrir Prairie are sometimes recovered as belonging to a subfamily within Coronequidae, though they may instead belong to a family just outside the formal grouping. Another close relative of the Coronequids are the Fluvequids. These are specialists of wetland vegetation. They can swim, though they are generally negatively buoyant and instead sink to the bottom to feed or escape predators. Most are quite small, around 12 to 60 kilograms. However, the most famous of this lineage, and indeed the name-bearing members of the group, are the Kelpies. Like the Coronequids, these horses sport prominent fangs and can be extremely violent. Stallions can and do kill one another in their brawls, and they are also among the highest kill count of any animal on assembly surveys, as a particularly persistent stallion broke into a research station and killed 11 researchers by dismemberment or opening their throat, and injured many more before it was put down. It is believed this extreme degree of aggression was the consequence of an old steam furnace making a sound near identical to a foal's distress call, and it was an assault at night while most in the outpost were asleep. But outside of this incident, they still have killed 1 researcher and injured 2 others in a research vessel on the same mission. Oftentimes, these missions have fairly low mortality. It's rare for accidents to be fatal, much less to this extreme degree, and has resulted in this animal having a perhaps overstated reputation for ferocity and lethality. After all, in both instances of attack, it was a stallion either defending their herd or mistaking machinery for their young. That said, overstated or not, this reputation was earned in blood. This was not named after the man-killing horse in Scottish folklore for nothing. They are obligate herbivores, as are all perissodactyls, compared to the artiodactyls, which regularly inclined to omnivory, but not eating the people they kill clearly does not prohibit the Kelpie from such extreme assault. Perhaps the strangest horses in Kaimere are the Hippocnids, the sloth horses. Though initially assumed to be a group of calicotheres, these instead descend from animals like Myohippus or some other early equoid not currently preserved in our fossil record that traded hooves for claws. Though it seems they were once more diverse, with a lineage developing exceptional limb mobility, the modern genus Hippocnus itself is much more akin to bears or panthers in climbing ability. Certainly able to scale a tree with minimal effort, but not being able to brachiate or maneuver from tree to tree like an orangutan, as the extinct Hipposimias is thought to have been able to do. It is believed that competition from arboreal oreodonts that had a lot more dietary flexibility was probably their undoing during the Great Drying. Even so, Hippocnus remains a fairly common sight in the equatorial jungles, proving that most bizarre horses in Chimeir still have success in Kyrule's most dangerous of habitats. Horses in Kaimere have great appreciation to its peoples as among the most important of domesticated fauna. Unlike Earth, where only one branch of the diverse equid tree survived, not only did many of our extinct horses survive and thrive in Kaimere, the basal horses have enjoyed many events of diversification thanks to plenty of forested habitat in which they could diversify. It can be easy to look at horses on Earth and see a fairly linear evolution of many-toed horses to the single toe of modern species. A classic picture of evolution refining a lineage to what can be seen as an inevitable, more perfect conclusion. However, much of their evolution is driven by a changing world, a transition from woodland to grassland. The evolution of modern horses is very much a consequence of the context on Earth. In Kaimere, where even at its most arid still had plenty of forests, has instead provided horses with many more opportunities to explore far more options. In this context, that was not driving horses down the narrow path we had, we can see many other ways in which horses may have evolved. Their story is not an inevitable perfected conclusion, just the way they happen to go in our world. In Kaimere, where they were given many more opportunities, horses radiated into far more forms and have thrived in many unexpected ways. Cheers and great thanks to DinoMaster337 for sponsoring this episode. DinoMaster337 also illustrated this fantastic piece of a shoe hunter and his hounds taking on a herd of speckled horses, a scene that one might imagine is quite common out on the Howsey Prairie. It was almost 2 full years ago that he sponsored the horses in Kaimere, just to give a sense of how long some of these subjects have been in the works. I knew that horses would be a big one. I had a lot of plans for known world taxa and many weird lineages beyond, and I needed a lot of time for research and contemplation when bringing all these weird horses that I had planned to fruition. A lot of ideas got cut, as they always do when refining concepts down to execution, but having an equatorial forest of weirdos and prehistoric lineages came and gone, I'm happy to say that I was able to bring most of these ideas to life in some form or another. Perhaps more so than any other clade, I wanted to make horses fairly diverse, as their evolution on Earth is so often presented in a very linear and almost inevitable way. Their story is a convenient example of natural selection and a good way to educate the fundamentals, so I do appreciate why this is often taught the way it is. It's a very useful case study. However, natural selection is a much messier and more experimental process than we can practically teach in many introductory contexts, so while we can say this is my celebration of prehistoric horse diversity, and my own case study of how speculative evolution can offer insight into how evolution works, and that context so often drives adaptation, and what we see on Earth today is not inevitable. Even the simple reality of more grasslands has had countless cascading implications for the evolution of so many animals on Earth, with ourselves and horses being 2 excellent examples. I also wanted to give a huge shout out to my many sponsors and those who have added to the art budget of this series. Thank you so much for your contributions that I got to bring so many wonderful and weird creatures to life. This was super rewarding, and I'm very thankful. David and Ian made particularly robust contributions to this episode's art budget. David's the one who suggested I have this episode air today on Lunar New Year, and I'm very glad he did because it all culminated in a really exciting series. Thanks again to Dynamo Terror for putting together this document on perissodactyls that might have been eligible for harvest. Of course, most did not survive, but it was an excellent starting point, and I know he did a ton of work on it. He also drew this to Stenonine, which was a very useful reference as this lineage of horses doesn't have a ton of rigorous reconstructions out there. At his agreement, I've included this list of eligible taxa in the description of this episode and other perissodactyl episodes, if you'd like to check them out. Today, with the exact time depending on your time zone, marks Lunar New Year, the beginning of the Year of the Fire Horse. Exploring all these strange and wonderful horses was such a treat, and of course, I felt like a wonderful way to kick off the new year. My great thanks again to Dinomaster337, David, Ian, and all others who have contributed so much to the art budget of this episode and others in the series. Next week, our series concludes with Arkland Archivist, David, Ian, and many others taking on a safari through the known world and beyond, where we will meet the rhinos of Kaimere. Thank you so much to my sponsors, to my Patreon patrons for your continued support, and thank you so much for watching. Cheers, folks!